A common mistake is misinterpreting the instruction, point the racket head to the ground. Players will break their wrist to point it down. This will cause your wrist to get hooked. Once your wrist is hooked, it becomes all friction with no solid contact and zero explosive power. Today, let's focus on the pivot points in table tennis. Let's start with the forehand. I really admire the forehands of Sun Ying-sha and Fan Zhendong. The key similarity in their forehands is that during body rotation, the direction of motion of their hand and shoulder is consistent. So, why do we often struggle to loop the ball successfully? A common mistake is rotating only the lower body while the upper body stays static, or failing to rotate at all. The crucial point is to synchronize the movement of your shoulder and hand. For example, if my hand's target position for the backswing is here, my shoulder must rotate to match it. If my hand needs to be lower, my shoulder must follow it down. And if my hand is positioned further forward, my shoulder must also be forward to support it. However, many amateur players keep their shoulder static, without adjusting its height or depth, when hitting a forehand. When your shoulder is locked like this, you're completely cutting off your power source. Once it's locked, your stroke degenerates into a simple, powerless arm swing. This prevents you from achieving a compact, powerful stroke like a pro, who actively rotates and drives through with the shoulder. Compare that to hitting with a static shoulder. That's the root of the problem. For instance, when driving a topspin ball, your backswing is here, requiring just a slight shoulder turn. For a loop, the backswing is lower, so my shoulder must follow my hand further back. Against backspin, the backswing is even lower, so your shoulder must not only rotate but also drop significantly. Remember this rule: the movement of your shoulder must stay perfectly aligned with your hand and racket. Take the backhand loop for example. If a sidespin serve comes wide, your shoulder must follow the ball over. Don't just reach with your arm while your body stays still. If the ball comes slightly to the right on your backhand side, your shoulder must also follow your hand and move to the right. Doing this will immediately improve your consistency. The same principle applies to forehand loops against backspin. When your racket drops back and down for the backswing, your shoulder must follow that same path. Your shoulder must adjust to find the correct position based on your racket's backswing. This is how you ensure your entire motion remains compact and connected. Otherwise, your stroke becomes disconnected and messy. The problem is that the direction of force from your shoulder and your racket are not aligned. This is what leads to so many unforced errors for amateur players. That covers the backswing. Now for the forward swing. Let's discuss how the shoulder generates power against a topspin ball. On the forehand, after rotating through the shot, the key is to bring your shoulders back to a neutral position. For a forehand drive, you rotate so your non-hitting shoulder is forward and your hitting shoulder is back. After every single shot, you must recover to a position where both shoulders are square to the table. You execute the shot, recover, then rotate for the next one. Your body should be rotating on a horizontal plane. For every forehand shot, the sequence for your shoulders must be a rhythm of rotated, then square to the table. You must develop this shoulder awareness. Otherwise, your upper body becomes rigid, as if it's locked, making it impossible to generate power. Now, against backspin, what's more important, getting low or rotating? Getting low is the absolute priority. So, even if you don't get a full rotation, as long as you lower your center of gravity, the shot is manageable. The real danger is rotating without getting low, combined with a large backswing. Regarding your shoulder position against backspin, if your elbow is at waist level, that's incorrect. Your elbow must be down at hip level, only then is your shoulder truly in the low, correct position. When you achieve this, your upper body mechanics are perfectly set up. The elbow and hip should be at the same height. If it's at your waist, it means your shoulder and upper body center of gravity haven't dropped. When looping backspin, getting your center of gravity, shoulders, hips, and legs down is far more important than rotating. Against topspin, the shoulders rotate on a horizontal plane. Against backspin, shoulder power comes from first getting low, then rotating back, and finally driving forward and upward with the shoulder. Then, the forearm snaps inward. Many players' topspin strokes look awkward because they lack forward and back rotation, while their backspin strokes fail because they lack high-low body movement. Even if I don't rotate against backspin and only focus on getting low, the motion looks much more coordinated. Next, let's discuss the elbow. The key pivot points are the shoulder, elbow, and wrist, and that's our focus for today's lesson. You might be surprised, but over 90% of this coaching comes from personal playing experience, not just repeating what a former coach said. From my experience with penhold, the most comfortable position is with a vertical racket face. Trying to close the racket face feels unnatural. Watching my match footage, I noticed that when I hit a forehand with a penhold grip, I unconsciously have a tendency to flare my elbow. So why do so many penhold players flare their elbows? The reason is that in a relaxed grip, the racket face is naturally vertical. This high launch angle causes the ball to go long. As a result, you develop the bad habit of using your elbow, instead of your forearm, to lower the ball's trajectory. And almost all shakehand players who flare their elbows are converts from penhold. So how do we fix this habit? During your backswing, you must learn to rotate your wrist. Because for penhold, a vertical racket face is most comfortable. Forcing the forearm to close the racket face causes elbow pain. So, don't rotate your forearm or upper arm, rotate your wrist. Open the face, close it. You're rotating the wrist. It has nothing to do with your forearm or upper arm. Many amateur shakehand players also have this problem when looping backspin. When they try to close the racket face, they raise their arm. This causes the loop to go into the net, so they compensate by lifting the elbow to scoop the ball, which is incorrect. So, what is the correct relationship between the elbow and the racket angle during the backswing? My principle is that for any forehand shot, the tip of my elbow always points downwards. Even when closing the racket face, I use my wrist to adjust the angle. Opening and closing the face has nothing to do with my arm. The common mistake is to adjust the racket angle by rotating the entire arm. You must use your wrist to adjust the racket angle for the trajectory. Therefore, your elbow should always point downwards during your forehand drive, loop, and loop against backspin. The elbow, along with the upper arm and forearm, moves as a single unit to meet the ball. It shouldn't lag behind or get ahead of the arm. They move together as one unit. For those of you who feel you can't hit forward into the ball, why does this happen? Because when you hit your forehand, you lift your upper arm and elbow. How can you possibly move forward into the ball from that position? This is exactly why your loop lacks quality and power. So why must the elbow point down? Because with my elbow down, when I see a short ball, I can extend my arm forward to meet it. I see the short ball, and I can reach forward. My arm drives forward on a horizontal plane, and my elbow stays fixed. The moment you lift your elbow, you can only swing in place. You lose the ability to drive through the ball and follow through. At the end of the stroke, the elbow remains stable, and the forearm snaps inward and upward. If you want to stop lifting or flaring your elbow, you have to fix it during the backswing. During the backswing, your racket face can't be too open, or the ball will go long, and your body will instinctively compensate. The web of your hand should point forward as you prepare your backswing. At contact, keep your elbow down and drive forward. The elbow connects the upper and forearm. It must not wobble. Then, let the racket head guide the motion from outside to inside, with your elbow serving as the stable pivot point. Now, on the forward swing, many players have this problem. When they loop, their arm path goes sideways. Why does this happen? Because when they were beginners, their opponent's pushes had no spin, so their loops went long. They compensated by wiping the ball sideways to lower the trajectory. Over time, this develops into a bad habit of wiping the ball sideways without finishing the stroke forward. This technique completely fails against heavy spin. This is why your progress stalls after reaching a certain level. Why do professional coaches focus so much on a player's technical framework at a young age? Because your framework determines your potential. The elbow's position is dictated by your racket path. It acts as a pivot, like the joint of a nunchuck, so it must be held stable, out from the side of your body. Unless you're going for a power shot, in a standard stroke, your elbow should not drift inward. Keep it stable and out. Only when the elbow is stable can your upper and forearm create a whip-like effect. Otherwise, your forehand is just one rigid lever. Your elbow position at contact should feel similar to a salute. It's a fixed, sharp angle, not something loose or awkward. I'm simply moving the racket from the backswing position to the follow-through position. Next, the wrist. Let's first understand the relationship between the wrist and the racket. During a forehand drive, your racket, wrist, and forearm should form a straight line. This is true even when your racket face is closed. Many players hook their wrist, which causes the racket head to get ahead of the arm. Others might flex it outwards or hold it in other odd positions. It should be straight, forming one continuous line. They must be on the same plane. Even when I close the racket face, the wrist and racket angle remain on one plane. You need to have this standard. Once your angle is wrong, you'll know if you're hooking or flexing. Focus on keeping them in a straight line, and it will be much better. Keep it level, with a slight drop of the racket head. The common mistake is pointing the racket head up too much. And why does this happen? It's your grip. If your index finger is curled up, the racket head will inevitably point up, leaving no room for adjustment. You must keep your index finger straight along the bottom edge of the rubber. This allows you to keep the racket level. When I'm looping, my wrist hangs down naturally and freely, but it still maintains a straight line with the forearm. The wrist can be lower than the forearm, but they remain aligned. For looping backspin, it drops even lower. This angle is created by the forearm, not by breaking the wrist. If the forearm is level, the racket is level. If the forearm drops slightly, the racket head drops further down, and the wrist hangs naturally. A common mistake is misinterpreting the instruction, point the racket head to the ground. Players will break their wrist to point it down, instead of letting the forearm's angle create the drop. This will cause your wrist to get hooked. Once your wrist is hooked, your shot loses all feel, it becomes all friction with no solid contact and zero explosive power. Second, all spin generation comes from a short, sharp burst of motion. The wrist doesn't move through a large range of motion. This applies to forehand, backhand, serves, and pushes. That's it. After the initial burst of friction, the forearm and wrist should lock together and accelerate through the ball. It's brush, lock, accelerate the forearm. Brush, lock, accelerate the forearm. I see a common misunderstanding. When you generate friction, it's not short and concentrated. Instead, you're flexing your wrist throughout the entire motion. You're trying to generate power while continuously shaking your wrist, which is why you make errors when you try to hit harder. The impact phase comes after the brush, by locking the wrist and forearm and concentrating the force. I only brush, then I hit. It's not a process of brushing and using the wrist for the entire stroke. The second problem is that when you generate power, your forehand thumb isn't pressed firmly on the blade. The same goes for the backhand with the index finger, creating a gap. Penholders who don't pinch the blade firmly have the same issue. So, when your arm tenses for power, your wrist is loose and wobbly. The racket must be absolutely stable at the moment of impact. Whether it's a drive or a brush then hit loop, the racket must be completely locked from start to finish. If it wobbles even slightly, the ball will fly off unpredictably. So why do you make mistakes? Because at the moment of contact, even on defense, your racket angle is shifting ever so slightly. This is why you make errors when trying to generate power. When you hit with power, the racket angle must be locked. The power phase must come from a firm grip. For a drive, as you swing forward from your backswing, grip the racket tightly and hit with a solid, firm structure. For penhold, when you want to generate power, there should be no loose space between your thumb, index finger, and the blade. You have to pinch it. Your back three fingers must support the blade firmly, not rest loosely, or the racket will definitely wobble. For shakehand, your thumb should press on the rubber, your index finger should support the blade, and there should be no gap between your fingers and the handle. You must grip it tight. How can you play well if your palm has a loose grip? When I want to generate power, all of my fingers are pressed tightly against the racket, with absolutely no space in between. Topspin or backspin, if I want power, my brushing motion must be short and concentrated. After the brush, lock it. After the brush, lock it. Same for the backhand. Why so many errors? Because the wrist is always flicking at the end. After brushing the ball, lock it. You have to lock that racket angle. Lock your wrist, forearm, and upper arm like a robot, and the ball will be consistent. So, if you want to reduce your errors when hitting with power, you must solve this problem of having a loose wrist. The wrist cannot move back and forth or up and down on its own. It needs to stay locked and connected to the forearm. When they are fused together, your shots will be much more stable.